event on the YouTube, but now when I click Zoom, it's supposed to be actually broadcasting from that scheduled event. So I hope we'll see. I hope it will. And if it will, and that would be really, really nice. Yeah, I think it's connected. Okay, awesome. I think we are totally streaming, and now I hope it is a scheduled event which I set up on YouTube. So we are back on track, John. Thank you very much. Getting back, and we will continue exploration of the topic which we covered in the first session: fear and uncertainty. And I'm really excited about our next step, because the last time you mentioned that acronym or abbreviation which you created. Honestly, I haven't heard that abbreviation before, and that's why I was pleasantly surprised. Fear, face, explore, and last two
would be accept
and release.
And release.
Precisely.
Yeah.
So I was in my mind, I was thinking, well, it would be awesome if we can dig into the practicalities of that process. And also, I was also very curious, because in my mind, I do have process on my own, which doesn't really match precisely, to the words which you proposed. And I would love to. I'm sure that process is kind of matching, but I think it would be nice to discuss it. The way I used to think about the process of dealing with fear, and your approach. I see where we are having overlapping, and where maybe we have a little bit different approach to that. So is it okay with you if we devote this session to the that exploration of the second stage, facing, actually first two, facing and exploring?
Absolutely. And I think it would be great, because our viewers can kind of sense and get a sense of the differences in terms of how people approach things. And it's not one size fits all.
Yeah.
we all come to this in our own way, but at least it provides a couple thoughts around how each of us approach fear and that uncertainty. So I'd be curious, Alex, I mean, would you like to begin in terms of how you may approach fear in your process? Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, I was never used approach of facing, as I mentioned last time in our first session, that for me to deal with anything at all, the first step for me always noticing. I mean, and this is crucial thing. I mean, some people maybe they call it awareness. If people who are familiar with meditation, you probably know that we could sit down and we could start paying attention to our thoughts, for example. And what happens is that before, when you do not pay attention to your thoughts, it's almost like I am identifying myself with thought. It's like almost like when I think something, it's actually me. It's actually a real kind of truth. So I'm not really doubting. I'm not even noticing it that I'm thinking. So for me to notice meaning, it's interesting kind of action. You're supposed to separate yourself from that thing. I mean, in order to notice, literally, you're supposed to kind of look at it, which immediately implies that if you look at something, you are not that something anymore. And the first thing comes kind of when you like start observing your thoughts, you realize the first thing, you realize that I am not my thoughts, really. I am something else. I mean, it's another question who I am. It's already totally different topic. But one thing at least kind of become clear. I am not my thoughts. And with the fear, because the last time we also touched the kind of the idea of that fear become, I mean, fear kind of sneaking in through, I don't know, imagination, through certain particular thoughts. I mean, the scary thoughts. So if I'm able to notice them, meaning kind of step away from that and look at them, it's for me, it's the very, very first and the only entry point to handle them. Because if I failed with that point, I am identifying myself with thoughts and I am totally possessed. Actually, I am under their control. I am that thought. So there is no way really to deal with anything. So that's what, for me, noticing, and I sense that kind of, I would say, similarities to facing, because in order to notice, I need to literally kind of turn towards it and separate myself, from that thing, whatever it is. So how you could comment it? What do you think? Does it make sense? Like my explanation, what for me facing would mean?
Absolutely. In fact, it's interesting because the way that I think about how I approach it, in a way, it's so complementary, because I think the idea is to create that awareness. And you just said something that's very powerful, and that was turning towards it. And that's where I think about facing. And there's the old adage that what we resist will continue to persist.
Oh, yeah.
Right. And so this idea that as the more that we resist these feelings, these thoughts, and we turn away from them, the more they're going to continue to show up. And so, this process is really about looking at it. And again, it's noticing it. It's creating the awareness, exactly what you've talked about. This idea of facing it is, once you notice it and once you take time, and I think this is really important, Alex, is that this is a process, at least for me, that it has to be in this moment. It has to be quiet. There's a lot of thoughts going on. And this is a time of introspection. This is a time where we take to really get a sense of where we're at. And we talked earlier about this idea of there's good fear that protects us, fear that is helpful to us as human beings. But then there's also fear that is around these thoughts that are created, the what ifs and the there's a word for it. It's the dramatization of what might happen, and that can be real as well. And this is not to discount those feelings, but taking a moment to really look at it. And once you begin to understand, okay, what is this about, and how true might this be for me, and asking, and this is where I say facing it is this process of just identifying it. What is really making me afraid? What is really, really holding me right now? And, so I can quickly use an example. I was thinking about this morning. If we think about the virus, this idea of, in my own mind, I recall this idea and my fear that my parents, for example, and my family are going to get it and something bad is going to happen. It's a thought that I'm sure many people think about. I was thinking less about myself, but more about those that I love. And the reality is that it's possible. But if I sit in this space of constant anxiety around the what ifs, and that, oh my God, they're going to get it and and something bad is going to happen. And frankly, my thought of what happens if they get sick and they die, this idea of loss, and notice where this goes. It just continues to build and build. So facing this provides an opportunity to begin to really, really look at this, and ultimately that's where we'll go into exploration. Ultimately, that is, okay, now that we see it, and now that we've identified it, and we've noticed what these are, what do we do with that? What do we do with those thoughts? What do we do with what we've identified as part of our fear?
Exploration. Well, first two things. When I was listening to you right now, there are two moments kind of triggered some chain of reactions, associations, and thoughts. Well, first of all, the word resistance. You mentioned that something which we resist will persist, or kind of fighting back. Yeah? So from what, we are facing something, but at the same time, I mean, we are using different words. It could kind of create some kind of I would say confusion. We need to be careful with the words. When you say we need to face, we need to confront it, but not resist it. It's facing it, but not resisting it. And that's where, for me, there are some nuances are coming. For example, in my technology, how I deal usually with fear, I'm very careful with any processes in my head, meaning I'm facing anything silently, meaning if I really able to notice it with a full power, it means I am not thinking. Like when you look at something with a full attention, there is a moment when you don't need to think to notice it. It's like if you're really, full attention to something, there are no really thoughts involved in that, because I do believe that if we allow thoughts to come, we actually already not noticing. I mean, we already thought, meaning it takes us out of present moment, meaning, again, noticing is silence. And that's the key how not to resist, because any type of resistance require judgment, require, I don't know, again, chain of thoughts. When we are silent, we are not resisting. We are observing. And those are nuances. I just want to kind of, when you were describing your process, I was thinking, I would pay attention to the full silence, and I would like to notice my fear, meaning sensations, and those thoughts, fearful thoughts, which create that sensation. And if I observe them in silence, what I usually notice is that energy, the possession, the strength, the grip of those thoughts, they are subsiding. I mean, it's almost like, that clock, when the sand clock, yeah, when you turn it, the sand goes this way or that way. I mean, because how they call it, that clock, which sand is inside.
Oh, the hourglass.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes,
So
yes.
imagine the energy goes this way or that way. I mean, it's you have energy, and where you pay attention, where your attention is, where the energy goes. Yeah, if your attention is totally on the fearful thoughts, all energy is there. If you're able to separate yourself, being silent and observe, those thoughts, you took part of energy out of it. And the more stronger your presence and silence is, the less energy remain there. And that's it. It become weaker and weaker. The more you silently looking at this, the weaker it become. It's the same as thoughts. When you meditate for a long time, you know that As soon as you notice your thoughts, in my mind, it goes like this. I'm talking loudly. La 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 la. It's like it's almost like dying those thoughts because all my energy right now in a silent observation of that thought. I draw energy like a vampire, you know, in a good way. I draw all energy out of it. So that's, yeah, we see that we're using very different description, but I just want to kind of make a comment about what facing and what not resisting really is. So we are winning without fight. So yeah, that's what I would like to add. And tell me please more about exploration, how you do that. What your process kind of prescribes us to do.
Yeah, I mean, for me, the exploration is asking myself questions. You know, again, how true is this? How true is this? And you know, it's exploring in that way to look at it and ask where, how much, you know, again, how much power does this have? You know what I mean? And what truth is behind it? And there are times when there is truth behind it, you know, but on the other side, the exploration of asking the questions around, what am I doing to either feed into this, or what am I doing to take away? It goes back to your energy piece, right? And so, you know, if I use the example of as I said, you know, that other people are going to get sick, you know, and I think about my parents who are older, right?
Yeah.
And my exploration is that I ask the questions around, you know, okay, I know that they're self-isolating. I know that they're following the precautions that have been set out, right?
Yeah.
But I also say, how much, so then that will ease a little bit of my fear around this, right? But there will always, and I think this is really important, there's still this uncertainty. Our lives are uncertain. Everything around us is always uncertain. Life is uncertain. But when I start asking my questions, okay, what are they doing to make themselves safe? What are they doing? And so as I ask those questions, I also then complement this by saying, there's only so much control that I have over this situation, right? In recognizing that I can't control this. That we can follow rules or guidelines, but there's only so much control that I have.
Yeah.
And the control that I do have is over where I take this.
Yeah.
It's the control about where my thoughts go. And so as I ask myself these questions, and as I actually answer those questions, and again, I think it's important that these are moments that we have to take with ourselves.
Yeah.
So you talked about that silence. This still is part of it. Okay, so how true is this? What are we doing to ensure that we're doing the best that we can do in this situation? What are those things that I do have control over? And what are those things that I don't have control over? And as we speak about that, we hear ourselves saying that, it takes that pressure off.
Yeah.
It lessens that tension and that anxiety.
Perfect. What I sense here is that your way of exploration slightly different from mine, and very powerful. What we call in coaching or in neurolinguistic programming, we call it reframing. And right. to be honest, that technique already known for thousands of years. I don't know, Roman philosophers. I think there are lots of work written about that reframing techniques. But the idea is that to change how you look at things. And what the examples which you just gave us is, for example, to have a bigger picture. I mean, like, yes, do we have control over it or we don't? Or there are things we do and there are things we don't. And if you try to control things which you have no control over, it's gonna stress you completely, because you are trying to kind of achieve something which is, you know, a priori by default is cannot be achieved. And yeah, it makes sense. And I'm sure there are kind of classical ways how you reframe. For example, you mentioned good fear or bad fear, or I mean, again, from my point of view, I would say, well, poison, in small dosages, it could be a cure or it could be a treatment, but when you cross certain line, it's the poison become deadly. Yeah. I think it's a lot of things in life like this, even food, even the good food. If you eat, 10 portions of anything, I believe that it tells us, like, be careful. Yeah. And when so the idea of fear is very, I mean, and if you just remember when we, I mean, like, is it okay if I, by this warning signal, is it okay if I'm not able too big or too screaming? I mean, is there any way for me to just calm down a little bit and do my thing? Yeah, I mean, I agree. There are lots of conversational kind of, like, how you could persuade yourself and change point of view to restore the balance. So that exaggerated feeling of fear become the normal one, like a balanced one. The one doesn't stop you from doing things. Okay, nice. I like it. So two types of kind of exploration. My way of exploration, a little bit more, how to say it, not as active, maybe because I used to practice meditation a lot. I mean, when I started kind of martial arts, when I was like 15, 16, and meditation become part of it. And to be honest, for me, much easier not to think. And because it gives almost kind of immediate powerful effect, I don't see even the point to persuade myself in, like, to start even talking, because if I don't, the fear disappears. So why to bother? But if people, for example, prefer to have a conversation in their head, so it would be nice to have a good conversation which is reframing your attitude towards fear, right?
Yes. Yeah. No, that's perfect. And I thank you so much for offering that and kind of the differences. And it's true. I mean, for those, and I meditate as well, Alex, and that, I can go into that space, but I do know that there's many people who haven't engaged in meditation. Certainly we know the benefits of it, and certainly it's something that one might want to explore. But in those moments where people are are more used to having that conversation, then how do we have that conversation that's beneficial to us?
Yeah,
and
precisely.
and you said something very powerful, that when we're in this space and it's overtaking us, we're not able to move forward. It's that idea we talked about with paralysis.
Yeah,
And we also aren't able to be productive and
yeah,
maybe make those changes. And so again, my approach being more of reframing, and how can we see this a little differently, change the way that our brain is working a little bit, and then beginning to open up that space where we can start moving forward. Maybe we
yeah,
come up with ways and ideas that will again begin to ease some of that fear, those
yeah,
things that I might have control over, or those things that I might be able to do to keep moving. So
yeah,
again, I think it's really nice that we've provided these different visions of how we approach it. But in the end, they're all in this space that we really, it's so important for us to create for ourselves.
yeah,
While there's all this chaos going around, I think both of our messages is to be in this space, with yourself, and take that time to be in those moments, because
yeah.
we often don't give ourselves that space that we really need.
Very nice, John. I like it. I like it. And what I also would like to to note is that right now we are talking maybe a little bit kind of abstract for some people, but I just want people to understand that, well, there are variety of different fears of losing jobs, or what happened with your health, or parents, or someone is right now in a hospital. It doesn't matter what kind of fear you have, the way to deal with all of them is the same. It's face it and explore. Those first two steps, they are almost like some kind of meta level. Doesn't matter what kind of fear you're experiencing. The steps are the same. Face it, or in my terminology, notice it, and start exploring. In my terminology, keep silent and look at it. Another way of start talking with yourself and notice where that talk leads you. Does that talk allow you more space? Does this talk calming you down? Does it talk helpful? Then it's a right talk. It's a reframing talk. If talk is harsh, if talk shaking your body, and after that you feel worse and worse, well, pay attention to that kind of talk. It's obviously not the talk you're supposed to have. I mean, that's pretty much I would give as a summary, of our conversation.
Wonderful, wonderful.
All right. So in this case, I would suggest us to meet again and dive into the next step of your process. So we touched on facing and exploring. Next will be, well, accepting. I'm really, really curious about that. It's a powerful thing to accept and release, or letting go, which is a mystery of this world. So we will be discussing acceptance and release in the process of how to deal with fear.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Alex. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Pleasure to have conversation with you, and yeah, see you next week. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you.